Happy holidays, everybody. Welcome to Bengals Breakdown here on Bengals.com. I'm Dan Hoard. He is Bengals.com editor Geoff Hobson.
Happy New Year, Hoardy.
Happy New Year to you. This is the last time we will do this in 2019. The Bengals wrapping up the season at home on Sunday against the Cleveland Browns. And for the Bengals, it's the opportunity to end a really rough year on an uptick.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get any. They can also stave off the worst season ever. They've never had a one-win season. They've only had a two-win season once in 2002, so they'd obviously like to avoid that. The thing I find fascinating is they haven't won a division game since A.J. Green scored 3 touchdowns in about 17 minutes against Baltimore in the home opener, I think, in 2018. 10 straight. 10 straight games in the division, and that, to me, that seems to be where they have to start building this thing. You got to beat those teams. If you can't beat those teams, you're not gonna go anywhere. And I remember when Marvin Lewis came in, that's one of the reasons he was hired. He's a guy who worked for Pittsburgh and Baltimore, the 2 elite teams in the division, and he turned it around rather quickly. And I think that's what this team has to do. Couldn't think of anything better than to hand it to him, because there was a little bit of bad blood, I thought, up there in Cleveland on December 8th. A lot of chattering, and be a good way to end what's been a bad season.
It's been a bad season for the Bengals. It's been a very disappointing one for the Cleveland Browns. The Sports Illustrated cover boys going into the year, they are now guaranteed of having a worse record this year than last year. 7-8-1 last year, 6-9 with 1 game to go this year. But they have definitely uncovered one of the best running backs in the NFL in Nick Chubb. He could have a 1,500-yard season with a decent game against the Bengals on Sunday. And then there's Joe Mixon, 25 yards away from 1,000.
Yeah, you know, one thing about the Browns, going back to the Browns, maybe that's why we shouldn't listen to the pundits, because that was, I'm thinking back to the long time ago, 1987, Cordy Snyder, I think, and Joe Carter on the cover of the Sports Illustrated with the Cleveland Indians, and they didn't win one for another 20 years or whatever. So don't listen to us. Don't listen to the pundits. Yeah, you know, Joe Mixon.
Don't listen to all the other ones.
Yeah,
just listen.
Right. Guy's trying to win the NFL rushing title, Nick Chubb. Last half of the season, Joe Mixon has more yards than Nick Chubb, 655 to 650. It's only 5 yards, and in the one time they met, Joe outrushed him by 40 yards. If you take, and you have to salute Chubb. This gives me an excuse to say Syracuse with you, but he can actually, if he gets 92 yards, he'll have more yards than Jim Brown had in 1965. Took him 4 more games, though, which is why Jim Brown may be the greatest player who ever lived. But Chubb's, first Browns rushing title since Leroy Kelly in 1968, first year of the Bengals franchise. But Joe's been step for step with them. I mean, since they figured out the running game. And, I think what Jim Turner has done, he's unveiled, really, this is what we thought Joe was going to do at the beginning of the year. I remember I remember talking to Joe that 1,500 would be very, very real, and if you take his pace over the last 7 games, 1,540 yards, he'd be right there with Chubb, and he would have he would break Rudy Johnson's single season rushing record. So I think beat the Browns with a big rushing day from Joe Mixon. That does set the table for next year pretty good.
Big subplot on Sunday will involve quarterback Andy Dalton. It could be his final game in a Bengals uniform. Andy is signed through next season, so the Bengals will have a decision to make in the offseason. They could draft Joe Burrow #1 overall. They could keep Andy as the mentor. They could trade Andy to try to get draft picks. They could draft Chase Young, and Andy could be their starting quarterback. We just don't know. Yeah. But in any case, there is obviously a legitimate possibility, at least, that this will be his final game in a Bengals uniform.
I think it's been one of the most underrated careers in Bengals history. I mean, when he drove to the stadium on December 13th, 2015, only Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers had won more games than he had since he came into the league. Led the Bengals to 5 straight postseason berths. No one has ever done that in this franchise. And if you go back to December 13th, 2015, that's when things began to kind of break apart a little bit.
That's the day he broke his thumb against the Steelers.
The day he broke his thumb. A.J. Green has only had 1 healthy season since then. His offensive line is, I think, if depending on what happens, if Fred Johnson were to start at left tackle, That would be the 8th different starting offensive line this season. He's had a lot of challenges, and I think people kind of forget that this man is, and what the season has done is, I think he's, if he wins, he's the winningest quarterback in Bengals franchise history. If he loses, I think he's 3 percentage points behind Kenny Anderson, which would be a shame, because this guy, and Kenny would be the first to tell you, he's one of his great admirers. You know, he's a guy, arguably the most successful quarterback in Bengals history, and I'm just not sure people grasp that, you know, and I think they'll grasp it, I think, probably when he's gone.
Yeah, I've felt in recent months that people have more appreciation for him now than they did during the run of 5 straight playoff appearances.
Yeah, I do, and all that said, people are going to remember him for what he did in the community. I thought one of the most insightful things Kenny said about Andy, and he said a lot of things, but he said, what I really appreciated was he's the first Bengals quarterback in a long time that embraced the community, that went out in the community and really took it in his arms. And you know, outside of Kenny and Boomer, I'm not sure. You know, Andy certainly has to be mentioned in that pantheon. And you know, you got to give a guy. You have to, you know, you have to give a guy his due. He didn't win a playoff game here, and maybe he will, maybe he won't. But certainly, you have to step back and look at his body of work, as they like to say, on and off the field.
He's led the Bengals to 11 wins over the Cleveland Browns over the years. We'll see if he can make it 12 on Sunday at Paul Brown Stadium. For Geoff Hobson and our photographer Marissa Contepelli, I'm Dan Hoard. Thanks for checking out Bengals Breakdown one more time here on Bengals.com.